The rehab industry has a 5% success rate. If a cancer drug had a 5% success rate, we'd probably pull it off the market or shut it down. Instead, we send people back to rehab 5, 6, 7 times at 30 grand a trip and call it a system. My guest today is Jordan Carlisle, Chief Product and Technology Officer at Sober Sidekick. Jordan spent his entire career focused on one mission, using technology to make people stewards of their own health. Now, he's running product and engineering at Sober Sidekick, a platform built to do exactly this for the hardest version of this problem, which is addiction recovery. In this episode, Jordan walks me through their empathy algorithm, how their feed maximizes engagement for users needing support and gamifies helping, why he calls most SaaS productivity porn, how he killed his own dashboards and built a personal operating system with agents managing his day-to-day stuff, and the 2-week sprint that turned Sober Sidekick's customer support team into engineers. If you're building at the intersection of healthcare and agents, this is for you. We unpack a ton. Jordan gives us a behind the scenes look at his Hermes agent that's running a lot of his stuff. I know you're gonna love this one. Let's get into it. Mr. Jordan Carlisle, super excited to get you on the pod. We got to hang out some recently at a meetup that you put on. I know we'll talk about in here, but dude, excited to have you on the pod. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, man. I've been watching you on Medtech. I feel like from afar, even though we're nearby each other. And I have been so eager to jump in the weeds with you on everything you're learning and seeing regarding AI and agents and how it's accelerating and complementing Medtech and beyond. Really excited for today.
No, and we're going to dig in. And those of you that don't know Jordan, Chief Product and Technology Officer at Sober Sidekick. Like Sober Sidekick's one of, I would say, the leading companies in the space. It's probably the leading company in the space, honestly. It's a platform using AI, peer intelligence to detect relapse before it happens, but also just be that like always on support system in a way. And you guys are doing some amazing stuff and we'll unpack it more. But I've known Jordan for a long time. We were cutting our teeth down there in Little Rock when you were working for the Chamber of Commerce, Jordan, which was a fun job. I was like very jealous of that job you had back in the day. And I think I was still doing the nursing thing, running around accelerators. It seems like eons ago. Looking back, though.
Yeah, I think it was over a decade ago.
Oh, easily. Yeah, it was like 2013 or 2014. Yeah.
Wow.
So many memories, honestly, like the Venture Center space down there and the Innovation Hub. I like very fond memories from our time there. Which brings me a little bit, I always like to open this up, give you the floor to introduce yourself, but then always ask the guests to like kind of weave in, whether it's ventures or jobs or things that kind of melded you into the person that you are today. And I remember there was some health tech stuff you were doing way back in the day also.
Yeah, I think shortly before the time where you and I met, I had experienced something that was pretty transformational in my life, which was going to a startup weekend when I was coming out of college. And before that, I had this mindset of like, I know I want to run my own businesses someday, but I was like telling myself the story that I had to go climb the corporate ladder to eventually be allowed to then go do it. And so I went to the startup weekend and all of a sudden it dawned on me that I didn't need anyone's permission to just go do it. And so then I got addicted to it. I started going to them all the time. If you're not familiar with the concept, you go in a weekend and try to build a company and then pitch it similar to Shark Tank or an accelerator program condensed into a weekend. So long story short, after doing a few of those, I finally got the courage to pitch my own concept and totally thought like everyone, no one would want to join me in this. I ended up finding a co-founder throughout that experience. And my first company that we built was in the fitness space.
Yeah. Was it something strong?
Yeah. So that was the second iteration.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The first iteration was called Project Olympia. And the idea was that people would be able to track their workouts and then have some sort of leaderboard where they're showing their workout stats. Fast forward a few years, and this was shortly after you and I met, ended up starting another company that was an iteration of that, but really focusing on looking at how health coaches could play a role in managing and facilitating wellness programs for small businesses. So went super deep in the wellness space, became a health coach in that process. I actually coached clients myself. And then that was where I really went deep on learning how to build web apps and software. So that was around that same period where you and I were both hanging out at the Venture Center.
And I honestly, we had that project we worked on together. It was congestive heart failure. It was going to be basically iOS phone based like location and movement tracking, sleep, steps, elevation.
We were too early.
We were too early. Dude,
we were too early.
There was like a company doing that exact thing and doing well. But I remember back then it was like, we're like, all right, what's the longitude and latitude we can get in this like MongoDB database? I remember looking at all that stuff. And we like honestly got something that worked a little bit, but way too early. And I had zero technical skill back then. And it was just harder to be technical back then.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, we actually got some interest from some pretty high-level executives with health systems in the Central Arkansas area.
They were certainly interested. It was just like, just get it to a further point or whatever. But I remember you and I both had other stuff going on. It's just like, it was difficult. We could reminisce all day. I'm sure the audience would love to hear us get onto some other stuff. Talk us through Sober Sidekick, and would love to hear how things have changed. I think there's a really interesting, I've heard you talk about it, and it's Chris, right?
Chris Thompson.
Yeah, Chris Thompson, the founder. I've heard his talk. It was, I want to say it was at a Heartland Challenge. He was like the keynote for the Heartland Challenge, I think. But anyways, I've heard that story, but I think the audience would love to hear like kind of how it evolved over time, maybe where it started, what it moved to when you joined, and then what's in the big boulders you've been pushing up the hill lately.
Yeah. So I'll start with how I first met Chris and what led eventually to me joining the Sober Sidekick team. So picking back up where you and I met, fast forward a few years, I joined the Whole Health Institute, which is a nonprofit that Alice Walton started, now called the Heartland Whole Health Institute, with the mission to move care in the U.S. towards whole person care and also advocate for policies that incentivize whole person care. And my role there was director of digital health and innovation. So I was looking at best in class digital health solutions that would complement or augment programs that we were running. And Alice had this incredible network of people that she was getting introduced to all the time that we got to benefit from. We really got to see like best of the best in the space. Along that same time period, I met Chris, and he was visiting for some program here in Bentonville, this super scrappy young guy in his late 20s who had built a mobile app, taught himself how to do it, and was just super passionate about helping people because of his own lived experience through recovering from addiction. And one of the things that I learned throughout my experience at Whole Health was that even with all of these incredible innovations, so much of the digital health space is still reliant on the distribution of a health system or a payer. And so many of the things that we saw, it was like, oh, we can do this once you give us access to the pipe. And it was frustrating for me as someone who got started in digital health, thinking through more of a consumer-oriented approach or more direct to consumer. And so when I saw what Chris was doing, and then what was really cool was like the rate of change in between meetings. It was like, would give him feedback, and then like 2 weeks later, he had launched a new version of the app and 10,000 more people had joined. And so it was this obvious moment where I was like, all right, he's doing something pretty radical by going direct to consumer, trying to reach people in moments when they're really suffering in their addiction, and then using that moment to engage them proactively, and then really filling in this gap that healthcare can't really see for people who are experiencing the struggles with addiction. So fast forward, I eventually talked to Chris. I'm like, I'm thinking about leaving the Whole Health Institute. I really want to get back to a startup, and he agrees to bring me on board.
And can I just jump in just really quickly and just say too, I feel like in healthcare, like I know you've talked about it being sick care a lot, right? But there's almost, even from a consumer app side or whatever, like I feel like there was probably a lot of people struggling with addiction being overlooked or not viewed as the right type of kind of consumer to people to build an app for and all of those things. So it's this underserved market and probably taken advantage of market in some respects.
Yeah, great point. So it's worth putting some numbers to that. Not only is it underserved as a market, the incentives for it are just absolutely horrific. So if we look at the US today, there's roughly 30 plus million people a year who are actively struggling with an SUD issue. And from that, we're spending roughly $50 billion a year on treating SUD through rehabs, outpatient, and medically assisted treatment. And unfortunately, the success rates, those interventions are really bad. So when someone goes to rehab, success rate is only 5%. Typically, someone relapses within a year of going. It costs $20,000 to $30,000 every trip. And then that person is likely to go back 6 or 7 times. So if we think about this, if we compared that to any other area of healthcare, say like cancer, the costs are at that same level. If we were talking about a success rate of 5%, we would change something. We'd do something different. And that's one of our main motivators is like, how do we really disrupt that? And we believe that it takes engaging with that individual longitudinally and continuously, and not just thinking of it as like this episodic moment, because it's really easy to actually get sober when you're in a rehab. It's really hard to stay sober when you go back to life and have to deal with all the shit that you're dealing with, right? So that's what Sober Sidekick's all about. It's how do you help people through those moments in between what traditional healthcare offers.
That's really interesting. I've heard it been described, Jake Arnold, who we both know, he does a lot of stuff with veterans. We were talking about trying to understand, as well as the homeless community, and then trying to understand of the kind of homeless people, the people that he's worked with and served through some of the volunteer organizations. I was trying to go what's this kind of spread, or if you could put these into a schema of what are the root causes that these people are dealing with? Is it PTSD? Is it this? Is it that? And on the drug addiction side, and he described it as, we think of it as why don't they just climb the ladder, pull the bootstraps type thing? But he was like, what you don't understand is their home environment, the people that they're supposed to lean on are actively pulling them down, pulling them back in, right? So it's they may be looking at a ladder, with some missing rungs, but then they've got people trying to pull them back down. And not maliciously, it's just the situation, right? But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting perspective from him. I looked at my Google Calendar real quick. I talked to Chris September 21st, 2021. It was Spencer plus Sober Sidekick. I don't know what we talked about.
Yeah, that was about the same time that he and I first met too.
You may have introduced us, honestly.
Yeah, I think there were multiple people that went full bore on connecting him into the Northwest Arkansas world. But going back to that last point, one thing that stuck with me that I learned early on from Chris that was so obvious now, and by the way, I actually decided to get sober when I joined and had some issues with it, some family history with it. And it's been a wonderful thing. But the thing that really stuck with me was when Chris told me that alcohol wasn't his problem. It was his solution, shitty solution to all the problems he was trying to escape from in his life. So what you just described is exactly right, which is why it's difficult, because it's so different for each person.
Multifactorial.
And so social determinants, behavioral determinants, all the determinants factor into it. Anything that effectively could be a trigger where somebody's going to cope with it with a substance versus something more healthy. Yeah, it's fascinating to think about it from that lens.
So it's kind of a two-parter. Just from payer perspective, how would you describe the level of care or level of coverage? Is it Medicare or Medicaid for a lot of these people? Is it other types of health plans, or what's the situation there? And then if you could talk through what's kind of the coverage mix of a lot of the people that are in and out of these rehabs and whatnot, because I'm curious how that's being handled. And then also if you could tell us that story of when the model had an element of the rehab centers, and then Chris making that realization, turning away money around that pivot. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's one of the most inspiring things that we can share. In terms of the mix of prevalence for different health plans, or I can't honestly speak to what it looks like for Medicare, Medicaid, commercial. We primarily focus on Medicaid though. One of our strategies is Sober Sidekick will always be free. So we remove any friction when you're in that moment, when it's 2 a.m. and you're I'm at rock bottom, I need help now. We can get people engaged at that moment. So because of that, we end up seeing a lot of people who are either on Medicaid or don't have coverage because it's super accessible. We also believe that's where we have the biggest opportunity to have an impact. It's really a loss leader at that point when you're on Medicaid, because what else are you going to do? And so for us, we're able to effectively partner with Medicaid plans because peer support in general is one of the more effective. It's more effective than just going to rehab. So if you're staying in peer support, it's going to reduce the likelihood that you relapse up to 48%. And we see similar effects with people who stay engaged on Sober Sidekick. So with that, we actually have started demonstrating cost savings for Medicaid plans. And we make it really easy for them to get started with us. And then we share on some of the upside and the savings. So that's how we're currently looking at it. But we know that there's opportunities and there's a lot of interest from both commercial and Medicare. But in terms of how we got there, as you alluded to, and this was around the time that I joined Sober Sidekick. Actually, this story I'm about to tell you enabled me to join Sober Sidekick.
Yeah.
When Chris started Sober Sidekick, he did it in a halfway house after he had finished going through his last round of treatment. Unfortunately, his roommate in the halfway house died of an overdose. He found him. And at that moment, he was like, I need to find a way to solve these moments when people are alone and they make these choices. The most natural first monetization pathway was, okay, I've been to all these rehabs. I've been to all these treatment facilities. Let me go back to them to see if I can do something with them to help the people who are also going through that. And that led to creating a model where Sober Sidekick had preferred providers that were sponsoring the platform. But unfortunately, what that turned into was a heads and beds model where those providers would assign somebody to sit in the Sober Sidekick community and on the forum and just recruit people all day. Then it got to the point where Chris started noticing people who were going through the same rehab multiple times who'd been on Sober Sidekick. Yeah. And there was very little interest from the provider to partner on proactive interventions that could have kept somebody sober.
Yeah.
And he was seeing people actively recruiting to go back through. And there were some moments where people were actually getting paid under the table to do recruiting and getting people to relapse. So it was really nasty.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that Chris started to try to fundraise. He got to about 800,000 ARR with the providers he was working with and had multiple VCs say, hey, if you can scale this up, we'll back you. So he literally had people ready to sign a term sheet and ready to write checks. And he went back to them and said, look, I can't scale this model. I have to cut off these customers and we have to figure out a different way. And he wasn't paying himself, early stage startup and really bold move. But ultimately that led to a forcing function that attracted the right investors. So it signaled to folks like the people at Nina Capital and American Heart Association and Ikigai Ventures to say, look, if you're willing to be that ballsy and make that commitment, we want to back you to figure this out. And we see the vision that you're pitching in terms of working with health plans because there's more of a natural incentive to keep people sober versus cycling through rehab. So
that's awesome, dude. Chills. Yeah. Like, seriously. I remember hearing that story for the first time. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. But I know finding the right investor, talk about a good signal. That's just like a beacon to be like, oh, okay, they're really serious about not just making a company that makes money, growing a company that makes money, but doing it the right way. So just pivoting a little bit to AI, but still keeping it within the Sober Sidekick. I'm sure you guys are using AI in the actual product, right? In my research prep, the empathy algorithm. Tell me how you guys are using it and what it's able to do for you guys from a product standpoint.
Yeah. So I may dodge your question here about AI a little bit, but I will get to the main important part of the empathy algorithm. So we are using more machine learning than AI, what we would think of as AI today.
And frankly, if you give your answer and then unpack what that means to you, because I think some people may group them in the same thing.
I think it's like a continuum. But the main point of the empathy algorithm is if we think about most social experiences like Sober Sidekick is. You think about the Instagrams, the Facebooks, the Twitters, TikToks of the world, they are engineered to keep you hooked and ultimately to sell ads, which means that they're going to do the things that are the most outrageous things that are going to keep your attention. And what we've figured out is a way to flip that and say, okay, instead of promoting the content that's the most engaging, we're going to find a way to gamify and promote the people who need help the most. Mm-hmm. So when you post on Sober Sidekick, within minutes, if not seconds, you're going to have on average around 6 people who are going to reach out to you on your post and say, hey, I've been through something like that, or hey, keep going, or something supportive. And more often than not, somebody's saying, hey, if you need to talk to somebody, I'm here for you. Yeah. And so it's able to use that social dynamic to do that. And so we're able to gamify that because in traditional like 12-step programs, the 12th step is like you give it away. And so you have people who are in a later stage of recovery who are actively looking for and motivated to try to help people. Helping people who have just signed up for the platform within a minute, posting something, and then being connected with all these people who they can relate to. That's what the empathy algorithm's about. And we are in the midst of we're really starting to supercharge it using more LLM AI driven approaches. But that's the main, most important part of it is how do we connect people with the people who need help the most?
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then I will say on the back end, operationally, we're using AI everything.
Yeah. And I was going to ask, that's my next question. But if you could just, as it is to you, that difference between pure AI, which I think probably most people in the audience kind of understand LLMs, and then machine learning and how you guys maybe are just kind of allude to it or what it means to you.
So in terms of machine learning, what I mean by that is we're looking at pretty discrete outputs that we're trying to optimize on. So we're looking at, and we are using some things that are akin to how a large language model is trained to figure out when's the right moment to engage with somebody. But it's much more if your audience is familiar with data science and statistics, it's more of a linear regression where we're looking at a few different things we're trying to optimize on versus something that can be a general purpose thing that you throw at many different things that it can figure out. What our empathy algorithm's doing is it's optimizing for what are the key things to look for to put into a model to say, hey, this person is likely to need help at this moment. You could maybe argue that there's some AI elements to that, but it's not the LLM kind of thing that you would think of.
Yeah, I feel like all these concepts are, what's the saying, like a distinction without a difference. They're almost blending or merging together. And what's an agent? What's a skill? Some of this stuff is blending and merging. And is an MCP connector? Is it really just an API? It's good to conceptually understand the nuance, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of these terms and things are mushing together. But to that point, one of the things that we talk about all the time, I'm doing another Claude for CDMO's workshop on this, but the kind of operational layer of using AI internally, using it for processes, agents, and skills internally. I know there's probably 50 million ways that you guys are using it internally, and people personally are probably using it different. But I would say maybe starting at from kind of an org-wide perspective. How are you guys? Everybody's doing this or doing the same thing or working within an AI native layer that's org-wide, and then we can get into more specific role in AI use.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I have less things that I can actually show you for Sober Sidekick, but I can speak to it. I do have some things that I've wrapped up as here's my personal way of doing it that
of course
is applied at Sober Sidekick and can indicate some of the things we're doing.
No wrong answers here, Jordan.
But so I just want to note that because I can go into something that is a little bit more visual, but it's going to be much more of my personal kind of stuff.
Yeah. And by the way, you can share your screen if you want to at all.
Yeah. So for Sober Sidekick, I'll just talk through some of the high levels. One thing is we were set up to really run with this agentic movement that we've all probably experienced over the last 6 to 8 months. If we're using these tools, we were set up really well to run with it because we had built a internal knowledge graph for the company, all built in Notion. And so if anyone is a fan of Palantir or follows Palantir, they call it the ontology, which is how do you digitally map all of the things that you do in your operations and everything that you action, or what are your verbs? And all of our goals, our projects, our tasks, our meetings, our contacts, so our CRM, our personal profiles, all this stuff, we had built this system and then operating cadence to leverage in Notion. So it was our company's second brain or primary brain. And what that led to was once we started seeing enough use cases for things like Claude to plug into an MCP, and we saw that, Notion has an MCP, it wasn't necessarily a super strategic decision, but we had everything in one place. And so it made it super easy to plug in. And then immediately our whole team was supercharged. You think of meetings, project planning, Scrum processes, backlog refinement, all of these things now became automated immediately because we had it all in this one place.
Can I just real quick too, I feel back in the day before AI and before connectors and all this stuff, having it in one place was a requirement, but also data hygiene was a huge requirement, right? And now it's really just, do you have it in one place ideally, but do you have it in any places? Because the aggregation and the analysis, to hell with hygiene, can be handled by LLMs now. But it's really, a lot of companies struggle because they just don't even have it anywhere digitally that's remotely accessible.
Outside of kind of the core operations, and this is getting more to that point that you just made, we quickly last fall started plugging in our customer support software, Intercom. So using it to just mass evaluate what are people saying that they need, how can we optimize that, evaluating that, and then putting it on repeat. And then also for our product analytics on Amplitude, I was shocked at how well it was able to almost immediately provide data analysis like the most trained person on our team could do, which goes a super long way for us in terms of looking at what are the things that we can do to optimize engagement.
It's awesome.
More recently in January, we hit an inflection point where we did an internal hackathon to allow everybody to just experience for a day doing whatever they wanted and applying as much AI as they possibly could to it. Because we had some folks who hadn't really had that aha moment yet. After that day, there was so much creative energy because of what people had shared that Chris was like, hey, I think we should do this every week or every month. This was incredible. And then a week later, we got to the point where I was seeing a lot on X of people going end to end with their software development lifecycle, where you could literally have kind of kickoff planning mode all the way through design, development, QA, QC, and then doing your final checks to go into deployment. And I was like, all right, guys, we have to just stop everything and we have to figure out as much of this as we possibly can, going end to end with agents. And luckily, Ethan on our team, he was building agents before we even knew what agents were.
Yeah.
So we were able to allow him to take the lead. And then we built these use cases across the pipeline with support from the team of saying, here's what we would do at this step. And within 2 weeks, we came out of that with our software development process being very much, you're in this role, you're in this role, you're in this role throughout the process, dividing up like product and QA and development and design to every single person is now full stack. Our customer success team is now raising pull requests and pushing it into the development process. That was a really ballsy thing to do, but there was enough energy that we were seeing from other companies doing it where we're like, all right, it's worth us just stopping for 2 weeks to figure out how to do this. And it's paid off.
Yeah, that's huge. And for the non-coding people out there, so pull requests, and I may butcher this, but you've got your primary code base and the GitHub repository. I think your master file structure, right? And then a pull request is basically saying, hey, I've fixed this bug. I have modified this bit of code, and I'm going to submit a pull request for you to pull it in, review it, make sure it merges well, fits, doesn't break anything else. And then I'm going to push that to the deployment, push it to prod, push it to production code base. So that leap of having your customer support people be able to assess, diagnose from a technical perspective, what needs to get fixed, develop it, test it, QA, QC, review that code, and then submit the pull request. That's something that would have taken 2 or 3 departments months oftentimes, and they're running it end to end with agents. And I heard someone say there's no such thing as non-technical anymore. And there's really not.
I could not agree more.
Because you can do, with natural language, that's all you really need to do. You need to be able to define good work, what it needs to look like, user journeys, edge cases, all of that stuff. I do think there's still a big gap in the language of software just in general, like database schemas and this and that. And like whenever somebody's interested in really trying to get into not just AI, but like they're trying to get into Claude Code, they want to start like building their own stuff. Like I always there's a link that I'll send them and it's like 100 terms and concepts for software. It's just the vernacular, because I'm like, dude, if you understand this, like you're going to go so much farther than if you're just like having to stumble over it. When Claude Code or Codex or whatever you're using is like cooking and you're watching it do stuff and build stuff, and then it's presenting you plans. I know some people that have tried to get into this and it's just accept all, always. And like, they're not describing when they're in that building a PRD phase, they're not really describing things with a level of architectural definition and vernacular that like, is really helpful to do and understand and stuff like that. And then reviewing those plans is almost impossible if you don't understand that stuff. But anyways, I feel like that's the bigger gap now, is just the vernacular and the language. You're kind of learning a new language in some senses, but it's not as big of a cliff as it seems scary. But like, it's really not as big of a cliff. Okay, question here. That was a really good layout of at an org-wide level, some of the stuff that you're doing. I'd love if you could unpack maybe 1 or 2 hacks or things that you're doing with AI more on a personal side. This could be related to Sober Sidekick, like personal role within Sober Sidekick, or just like you personally. I know you do a lot of stuff just on your personal side. Open question. What is something that you think would be good for the audience to know or share? Your chief of staff thing's really cool, Hermes agent, but anything that you think would be fun to share.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this for a while, that I would like to share kind of something that I think is a good insight from my perspective for anyone who's building in healthcare. So I'll share my screen. Let me get set up here.
Nice.
My personal thesis for my career has been, and it's taken me a while to articulate it clearly, but it's been that technology will be the biggest unlock to empower individuals to be true stewards of their health. And that was what I did at Whole Health. That's what we're doing at Sober Sidekick. And it even goes back to the thing that you and I worked on as well. I've had all these thoughts and ideas. I was able to articulate a lot of them in a TED Talk that I did in the fall. But what's hilarious is like, I was speaking in that TED Talk thinking about like, this is what the future is going to look like in 5 to 10 years, where you're going to have AI be able to do so much more as long as you have the data about your health, and it's going to be able to do more with you. And then 2 months later, everything I was thinking about actually started happening. And so in the past few months, I've just gone so deep in trying to really go as far as I possibly can in building my own kind of personal operating system using agents. So I'll talk about this, but the main takeaway for this is actually from that learning where I think things are going to go that are going to totally change the way that we think about software and technology in healthcare.
Yeah.
I built this personal agent. I use Hermes agent as the harness or kind of the light software package that kind of gives it some extra oomph about like how to behave.
Yep.
And then I've dialed it in for myself. I think everyone will have a personal at some point.
Yep.
I do this like really simple thing to really kick off a lot, where I do this daily reflection where I'm just like talking to my agent, and I've set it up so that I can talk to it in Discord, where I do this like little morning reflection, and I do like gratitude, how I'm feeling, here's what I want to do today. And at the end of the day, I say, here's what I did, and here are things that I need to do tomorrow, and like things that I learned. But then what I've done is I've trained my agent by really just talking to it to say, here's all the stuff I want you to do for me, and then dialing it in here and there. So if you've played around with agents, it's like, it's all in markdown files. And so like just dialing in, like, here are your rules to behave in certain ways for certain things, but I've mapped it to all these areas of my life that I want this like personal assistant around. So my health, my finances, my personal branding and content, helping manage my relationships and like keeping in touch with people. I have a full bore like learning system, and then like my career and admin coach. And it all gets triggered off of that reflection process. So once I do that, the agent is trained to know, using some frameworks that I've loaded it up with, to help me identify, here's what you need to do. So for example, I do like quarterly goal setting, and it uses OKR. So if it's like at the end of the quarter and I haven't done my goals, it actually knows to spin up a process to work through it with me when I do my reflection.
That's awesome.
And then it does the same thing for like my projects, all my learning planning. And I've just like fed it all these frameworks that I think are going to be useful, and tuned it to know and recognize when to help me leverage those things, and doing it on these cycles of daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly. And the 4 layers of like how this is working is, you have your input layer. And so for healthcare, what I'm doing with my agent is I'm giving it as much access to my wearables and all my lab data that I'm doing for direct to consumer lab testing. And then you think about that for the other domains as well. And then I'm storing it myself. So I have the storage layer. And then there's the execution layer, which is the large language model. And then you have the agent harness. So I'm using Hermes. And then you have things that you mentioned earlier, like skills and the tools that it uses. And then you have your interface, which is interesting because I've gone from using all these different apps to like mostly talking to my agent through either Discord or a terminal, which is interesting because I think extrapolate that into the future, I think that's actually really significant for how we think about how we're going to interface with these tools in the future. I'll pause there real quick to see, just because I've covered a lot so far.
No, that's really good. Honestly, like this is, I think you're like personal health maxing, and like
I am.
I feel like everybody has these things, right? That they're like, you're brushing your teeth in the morning, or you're taking your kid to daycare or something, and you're like, oh, I need to do this and I need to do this. And usually it comes at times where there's not that many distractions when you're brushing your teeth or you're driving. Right? And I do the same. I don't actually have this full whatever setup, but I've found myself so many times just talking to Claude to help prep for the day, or do this or do that, and having it check my emails and do this and do that. It knows enough about me that it can do some like decent stuff. But I think this is like that extra layer where you're giving it so much more context, health data, otherwise. The thing that's kind of exciting to me is like you could have, your own OS, and it has enough intelligence and understands what to do, and whether you're importing skills from someone else as like a base layer or something. But you don't have to be, I'm thinking for like more mass audience here, like mass consumer, that kind of thing, where like you could be doing some check-ins, and it's going to be getting so good in the very distant, it's probably actually already capable, where the timing, your voice, how it sounds, whether it's strained, whether it's this, it knows how you slept last night from pickups, wearables. It knows maybe there's some like dietary tracking in there or whatever, where it could like sniff things out for you and make these recommendations. And that recommendation could be like, hey, you should eat some steak tonight because your red blood cell count may need a boost, or hey, make sure you get some extra sleep tonight, or hey, you should consider taking some like magnesium, some vitamin D, like small things like that I think in aggregate compound over time to make people just much more healthy. So I guess my broader point there is I think there's lots of very subvert ways that these things are getting so good, where the average person can just like interact with it in these simple ways like a reflection, and it will do a ton of heavy lifting and actually like generate good, impactful, whether it's recommendations or just insights that end up being very quickly and easily actionable.
Totally. And yeah, I think right now, there are some probably like comprehensive experiences. And I think even Claude is like getting to the point where if you talk to it long enough, it like figures some of this stuff out. But I think there's another level to it. And I think there's still a gap between what someone like me or you can figure out and hack together. So what is actually going to be accessible and that everyone is going to have in their pocket at some point. But the interesting thing is that if the software or the capability or the like flow doesn't exist, we've gotten to the point where agents can build whatever they need themselves. So it's really, to your point, that like recursive, like how does it get feedback and do that? So like for me, the thing that I was really concerned with was like security. And so one of the first things I did was like, hey, I need you to do your own security audit every single day. And there's likely flaws in that, but I think that'll probably get figured out over time where the average person isn't going to have to worry about it because the agent itself is like doing the maintenance and managing it.
I agree.
And here's what the tech stack looks like for me personally. Here's like the different frameworks I mentioned earlier. So in productivity, habits, my personal tutor, financial planning, health monitoring. So these are a few things I've just dialed in. And really what I did with each of these was like, I had accumulated all these over time where I was like, these are frameworks I wish I could keep up with, but I can't keep up with all these all the time. So I was like, hey, I need you to go research like how to do all this. And so I didn't even spend time explaining it. I just said, you need to go learn all these frameworks and then you need to come back to me with a plan on like how we're going to implement them and put them in.
And just quick add there. I just use some tax and 2026 finance planning and stuff like that. And like, I think something for people to wrap their heads around, like you said, you don't have to have the solution. All you have to do is just articulate the problem where it's like, hey, I'm doing this, I'm switching this. And I want to, are there like retirement accounts for like solo type people where you're self-employed, whatever. And I want to look into this and like, can you like work me out a plan and make some recommendations, whatever. And like, it came back and it was like, yeah, you can do this, you can do this. And actually with your setup here, you can do this specific type of reimbursement plan, accountable reimbursement plan. And it was fantastic. And then I went from that to like, all right, build me a spreadsheet. I'm going to have a meeting with my accountant next week. Did that. You don't have to have some like grand solution in mind. All you have to do is articulate the problem and then point it in the right direction. And it's going to get you most of the way there.
Agree. And going back to your point earlier on, there's still this like technical gap, even though we've gotten past the point of the like being a difference between a technical and non-technical person. And I actually would have added one more thing that I'm not sure if you mentioned it or not, but it's like really the key ingredient is, do you have the curiosity to ask the right questions or just not even know, you don't have to know the right questions, but just asking questions and then knowing, hey, if I need to go deeper or if I don't understand this, to just keep going. I think for your like finance stuff, I've done similar things where I didn't know exactly what I wanted or needed, but I was able to get there by continuing to go deeper into the questions.
I think a huge part of that, Jordan, is the difference between querying a search in Google, which everybody's been doing pretty much for a really long time, and chatting with an agent, like a chat bot, basically. Because I've seen when we launched medtechvendors.com, which like primary interface was a chat agent, you would be amazed at the stuff that people put in that chat agent thing and fired off. It would be like, hey, describe what you want to build and like what type of group you're looking for and what you need them to do. And they would just be like marker bands or like catheter or like query structures that they just were interacting with it like they would with Google, because it was just like these weird, snippy, incomplete whatevers. And I feel like that is a huge corner to turn for a lot of people. But like the sheer nature of like interacting with a chat agent is like the back and forth and that curiosity, and you have to keep going and peeling layers. And so I feel like people are like turning that corner, but it's pretty slow still right now. Yeah, that's interesting. I've been thinking about this for Sober Sidekick is like, how can we help or how can we tune the models and the agents to know when there's someone may actually need a response that's going to help get them to that next question. Like, how do you make somebody feel more comfortable and like intrigued enough? Because not everybody's programmed that way to like continue to just ask questions. So it's like, how do you almost get that like first response? And if you can really nail that first response of unlocking that where they want to continue asking, to me, that's going to be a big unlock. And I have no idea what the answer is there, but I feel like that's going to be something. Yeah. Inline context inclusion and persona routing is some of the things that we've tried to, it's picking up very early. Is this a expert, proficient, or novice? And it takes different approaches, different amounts of inline context, different amount of, am I going to batch questions in like sets of 3, or can I like give them a long list, and how much hand holding? But it's really important to do that, I think, if you have a chat interface that's for a broad consumer use, for sure. Yeah.
And we've done it. We have kind of some key personas based on their user behavior that we've started doing that, but it's like, there's so much granularity we can get down to it. So yeah, let's see what I have here.
Ooh, I love this one.
Okay. So there's 4 key things I think that are really important takeaways. And this is one of the bigger ones, which is that like agents are going to start interacting with each other. And I hate to say this, but like so much of what we do with SaaS products is like productivity porn.
Yeah.
Where the products make us feel good because it's, oh, I'm doing something useful. And I realize like how much I do that's just like unnecessary, but it makes me feel good because I'm using the interface when I started like fully embracing my agents to do more work. But I think what my personal opinion is, I don't think SaaS is going away. I think that it just has to be reoriented to being agent oriented, where our agents are going to work on behalf of us, interfacing with either MCP or CLI or API or whatever from the tool, or maybe another agent from the tool. I went from using all of these tools directly, Amplitude, Slack, Linear, Intercom, I mentioned several of these, to now like I'm chatting with my agent to do our analytics, building out infrastructure, like so much stuff.
Yeah, we're still very early on this, and I want to talk about some adoption type stuff here in a second. But like, I view dashboards. Dashboards are good for visualizing data and stuff like that. The traditional user interface, like when you open QuickBooks, it's a nightmare. There's 50,000 buttons to click. You don't need any of them, barely ever. And I think I view that traditional button click dashboard and interface style as just fully a constraint. Because once you have an agentic system or just like an agent at all or a chat interface or whatever, like even just let's take Claude, right? Like if you have Claude and you have the connectors turned on for your Gmail and your calendar and maybe an Airtable and then other stuff like Notion, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, I can just say, go look at this and then look at these other two things and then do this thing, where like that would have just taken multiple windows open, clicking around, copy and pasting, exporting, loading in, it. And so like once you realize, oh, an agent can access all those things, only access what it needs to, understand what it needs to access from some pretty basic natural language stuff, and then just go do it. All of a sudden you're like, I don't want to use I don't want to go have to open 5 windows and tabs to.
It's not only for me, it's not only that I don't want to do it. It's like when I try to do it, I'm like, this is so slow. I can't do it. Me building like custom, because I used to be in our analytics software every day, all day. And in some ways, like it's probably bad that I'm not, but it's because I'm using Claude and my agents to just go so much deeper and faster on it. There's been moments where I've had to go double check stuff and go touch grass a little bit, but truly it's been a massive unlock. But then it's like you multiply that across every person on your team. It's just incredible. But yeah, let's see. I think let me see what else I had here. By the way, if we want to think of an example, this entire presentation was created by Helm, who is my chief of staff.
In Claude Design, which I sniffed out, which is amazing.
Yeah. Okay. I think these are the last 2 things I want to cover here. Yeah. So one is, here's how I'm thinking about, if we think about what the future is going to look like with what we have accessible to us as consumers for health and how agents are going to unlock more for us. So if we look at just today, what we can get direct to consumer through our wearables and through tests, you have HRV, sleep, EKGs, CGMs, function health with their like 100 plus biomarkers, getting all my hormones. And I haven't done cancer detection yet, but I'm planning to do that. Genome sequencing, gut microbiome. I've recently been following this startup that's doing stool analysis with a little device that sits on your toilet. Oh. And so you have all these dimensions. And I think it's going to take a while for these to be common household things for everyone. And I know I'm probably going to be the extreme here, but imagine just how much more powerful our insights about health and ability to personalize health are going to be when you have all of these things accessible and also continuously tracking that are going beyond what you can get in just like a clinical visit. And then you have an agent on top of it that can process all that data. And where I think this is going is like, one, I think we're going to have personal storage. So you're going to custody your own data from all these things. We're going to have, and I'll just jump here. So we're going to custody it. And I think we should bet on that. I also think that right now we just experienced the inflection point with the frontier models, and that still hasn't fully dispersed into society. So not everybody's felt that aha moment yet, but eventually those models today are going to be open source. And so we're going to have the same power that we have today that has created this inflection point, and it's going to be open to anyone and accessible and free outside of the compute you need. And then I think that also we're going to eventually see the ability to do the compute on our devices. So whatever the next evolution of our phones are going to be, I think also augmented reality glasses are going to be huge here as well. And then betting on agent to agent, which I already mentioned today. All of the things I'm doing are really just an experiment to think through how can I push the limits for myself as far as I can go to try to figure out what is this going to look like. And this is what I'm thinking right now in terms of where things are going.
Yeah, no, I love that. I said that, I forget who I was talking to about this, but I think you can get a lot of information from blood, maybe more than any other single sample you can provide. And I was like, in my head, I was like, yes, you're going to have wearables to track certain things, but I'm envisioning like in 5 years or so, every family just has their health box and you go to it. Maybe it's once a week or whatever, and you just put your finger on it and it takes a barely perceptible prick and gets blood out and then runs this panel of X, Y, and Z and gives you that data. It's local. It talks to your agent. It understands, and it has like health record insights as well. But I could see that. It's running on an open source model. It's running locally, right? All that stuff. So like I could see something in that vein. And I think there'd be huge benefit and like payer benefit to doing that. On the agent to agent thing, I think that's a huge bet. And I think some of that's already starting to play out because I was talking to Dennis the other day, earlier this week, actually. And they're really quiet about it, but the health insurance companies are already incredibly advanced with how they're using AI and agents to basically process and deny claims. And there's a lot of companies that are popping up in the space that are having healthcare providers and helping them use agents to submit and appeal claims. So maybe this is the next question here. I almost see this thing like coming to a head where like the hegemony of like insurance payers and such, right? That are going to try to use AI and technology to continue to do what they're doing that we would consider bad behavior, which is en masse denying things, making it extremely difficult to, you have to call in to get the status of this claim. And then once you call in, you have to submit this like tortuous form and you got to have all these things and it's got to be data structured just right and whatever. And all of that now, even the voice calls, like they have voice call agents that do that, right? So I'm kind of like, where does this go whenever it's like, hey, are you just going to have your agents set up to like deny stuff on a loop for a year and it doesn't matter how fast our agents get back or how perfect the data is or the fact that it's a 99.8% match for another claim that was approved previously. Like I don't know, I'm not going to bet on the legislative solve for this, but it feels like we're kind of like at this point where it's like Blue Cross Blue Shield's taking or United's taking 180 days to even process claims and then they're quick to deny them and then there's the long appeal process. But if we like this agent to agent stalemate almost, like where does this go? How does this get resolved? Because like they can do this in perpetuity and not even have to employ that many people to just continue to put up these roadblocks and barriers to reimbursing care and approving care.
Yeah, I love that question. Have you seen it was a couple of years ago, but the South Park episode when it was like shortly after ChatGPT kind of blew up and everybody like knew what ChatGPT was. So they did this episode where it starts off where they're concerned because they're afraid that the kids are all cheating using ChatGPT. And then like you cut to the teachers using ChatGPT to figure out if the students are cheating and they're feeding everything into ChatGPT. And then it turns into the mayor or something trying to form a policy and like it uses ChatGPT to like form the policy to figure out how to stop ChatGPT. And then everybody is just using their AI chatbot to figure shit out, to talk to each other. And then it's like figuring out what to say to your girlfriend. And then it's just back and forth. I think it's like that's like the satirical version of the question you're asking. And I can't even begin to pretend like I'm an expert in how a health plan operates. I know from working with them that sometimes it can be extremely frustrating with how they operate and the bureaucracy of all of it. And what I have hope for is that whether it's the existing players disrupting themselves or potentially we see something to disrupt the way that health plans currently operate, I think there's an opportunity to think about both sides of the table, like both in terms of providers and payers, to really think from first principles of what would it look like if you designed a health system or a health plan from first principles, knowing that you can now use agents to do all this stuff. And I just have to imagine that there's so much bureaucratic activity that happens that is creating the cost overhead and the delays and the inefficiencies and all that stuff. In our lifetime, I would hope that we figure out how to eliminate most of that so that it becomes actually more value additive versus extractive. But I don't know. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be like agents battling it out. And I think it's more of like, how do you just recreate?
I agree. I don't think there's going to be a solution. I think it's just going to be like agent purgatory hell, and like the whole insurance and payer appeals, denials, all that stuff is just going to persist. And I do think solutions will come to bear from people that kind of fully refactors how we think about it. And I'm almost saying, almost from like an IDN standpoint, where it's like you've got this full integrated delivery network, and then they're like, okay, we own kind of all the doctors we need, or they're like in our network, whatever. Like, what if we just cut out these payers altogether and then form these like kind of
risk?
More kind of insurance collectives, but it's like very much run with like less, hey, if we didn't actually spend all this money to hire all these people to do all these denials and handle appeals, and we really only focused on the things that are like problematic, and we like used AI to detect fraud-based variants and all of these different things, like how much would it actually cost to run this insurance company? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is like barely anything at all in the grand scheme of things. And so I do think that they're almost like a concierge care, where you've got like one doc and he just does cash pay, and he's got 100 people that they provide care to, and like it's their own little thing. Like taking that almost to its like extreme with actual system and surgery centers and diagnostic clinics and all of that stuff. I think it's tough to decouple the ownership class, because people forget these insurance companies own pieces of a lot of these companies, and then they have these very lucrative deals that are hard to get out of. But like, I got to imagine though that there's going to probably be like a watershed moment where there's groups of counties or regions of states that are like, hey, we're going to retract from the system, and we're going to let people opt into this thing. And if we get enough people that opt in, we can just have this be the policy. And like, who wouldn't be down for like a middle finger to the health insurance companies, that with the promise of you're going to get all your care faster, and it's going to cost everybody less, and the doctors are going to make more, and the healthcare providers are going to make more. I'm a single payer person, frankly, at the end of the day. But anyways, I hope that happens. I don't know what's going to be the linchpin, but I hope it does.
Yeah, I haven't sophisticatedly thought through all the consequences of a single payer system, but there's one component of it that I have landed on that this would solve so many of our problems, which is like, we need to at least have like an operating layer that everyone shares, or like a financial operating layer. Like that part, just like it's recreating the wheel for every health plan and every market and every nuanced kind of division of all of that. And I do think, to your point, I think it will probably, like, if we see this in our lifetime, it's more likely than not going to come from CMS. And I think,
when I said single payer too, I'm not saying that like private health insurance would cease to exist. If you want to bypass that and just get a full bore private plan, like you can do that. Or if you want to say, all right, well, I'm going to opt into the single payer plan, and then I'm also going to get an extra layer for maybe the specialty stuff that I just like, or concierge type stuff. Like you can do that. But I think like having that public option, the single payer opt-in type thing, and basically saying, like, like our administrative cost isn't going to be 11 or 12%. It's going to be 3%. I think that's just too attractive to a lot of people. And I know there's also a lot of legislative capture from the insurance companies, but
I think real quick, because we could probably go deep on this, but I'll just say I'm super biased towards wanting to see value-based care. It's my whole health background, and I was like a value-based care guy before I even knew what that meant. And I think it would be really difficult. It will be really difficult to actually see value-based care to its full extent if whoever's bearing the risk doesn't, the upside of the like long-term effect of whatever it is that you're doing. And right now, I don't know what the stat is, but it's something like somebody changes their health plan like every 3 years or
2.5.
2.5, right? So if you're making investments into that person for their long-term health, you're likely not going to receive the benefit of that. And so it's like, how do we figure out how to carry or pass on that benefit? And I think it will require a single payer or whatever the shared infrastructure is going to be, so that we can actually think long-term on these things.
It's one of the biggest things too, Jordan. There was the University of Arkansas College of Health Professions. They had their like Innovate for Healthcare like day. It was like a day-long event. I went and gave the keynote, and that's one of the things I talked about is like the financialization of healthcare has gotten so extreme, and I think we have to decouple that. And I'm like, not to say that there's not business involved, but like the extreme financialization of it, like it's a Red Lobster. We have to grapple with the fact that healthcare is different, right? Like the guardrails of a Red Lobster going out of business is like pales in comparison to the guardrails of a rural hospital being closed, right? Like private equity ownership of physicians groups and clinics and hospitals and whatever. When a PE group comes in, they cut staff in a hospital on average by 11% after the ownership change. Risk falls and hospital acquired infections and those things go up 25%. And there's some pretty insidious stuff too. When they purchase a nursing home, mortality goes up by 11%, and then the use of psychotropics goes up by 50%. because there's so many things where it's just like, we just need to be like, hey guys, let's not do this to our eldest, most vulnerable citizens. But again, what's the answer to like decouple like the hardcore pure financialization and kind of capitalist approach to like the basic healthcare everybody needs? I don't know what the answer is, but I think that like single operational kind of financial layer that you're talking about is like a piece of that. What did we not talk about? Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
Yeah, this has been great. It scratched a lot of my itches that I've wanted to scratch in terms of intellectual conversation here.
One thing I do, this is more like, I just want to get your take on, because I don't know what the answer is. And my thoughts on this have changed and evolved over the past even like 9 months. But like, I think a lot about like, there's all of these businesses and operators within these businesses. Medtech's the one I'm focused on. I mean, I see this in Medtech a lot, but real estate, legal, I forget the guy's name, but he was doing like disability claims management from the legal side using software and AI to do that. And he was just talking about, man, these attorneys, they don't know how to use software. They don't understand this. They don't understand. Like, I'm not sure what the best way, like executive leader at a company says, we want to start using AI more. Right. I used to think the answer was like hire an internal head of AI and then let it permeate out from there. And then he can just build stuff and agents and skills and then the people use them. But I've shifted away from that and been like, no, it really has to be like a core competency that gets rising tides, lifts all boats, org-wide approach. And you're not going to hire one person and solve this issue and get everybody where they need to be and everybody using the stuff. But like, even if that's the right answer, which I'm not sure it is, I don't know like the best approach to do that. And I'm drawing on your like, oh, we had a hackathon, internal hackathon. Or is it on-site workshops from an external group? Is it like, I don't know what the answer is to accelerate these non-technical organizations and getting them closer to AI native or swimming in that direction. I'm curious if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I do have thoughts. I have two kind of things. One I think is actually helpful, and then the other is just me bitching and musing. I'll say the bitching and musing first, which is like, we still have executives at companies who don't know how to type. Yeah. So like you think about like how much has changed in our lifetimes with technology. And I think that agents are going to be similar in that it's almost like you just have this like literacy of whatever the thing is, where we grew up at the right time where we learned how to type on a keyboard in school, where our parents probably didn't, they had a typewriter or maybe they didn't. And it's like things get ingrained into it where it just becomes like the default, like you learn to do it because it's such a ubiquitous thing that you can't do life without these things. So using a computer, using a smartphone now. And like, I have hope that AI will be more accessible and it won't require as much of a lift. But I think that part of it is just, you're going to have to see people age out. That's my bitching and musing perspective. But in terms of taking a shot at actually trying to facilitate that aha moment, what worked for us was making sure that everyone who participated got to do whatever the hell they wanted. We made it very clear that this day you can do something work related, but we want you to really just do whatever you're excited about. Interesting point. Our head of AI, who you would think was going to do something super AI centric, he wrote a pilot to a TV show that he wants to produce.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
And he used his agents to do that. That was his example. Another person on our team planned a nonprofit event and did all the branding and everything with it. And she'd never used AI before. And it was like, she was just blown away. Our COO built this financial dashboard. So it was like whatever the thing was that they were excited about or were interested in, because I think that that's what's required. Like we were talking about earlier, you got to have that curiosity to just ask questions. And to me, that's like biggest unlock. And I think that just leaning into whatever people care about is probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, dude, that's honestly, that was like, I think that's the right answer. I think that was pretty profound because I feel like you and I, a lot of people, but like you and I like working. Like we really
people ask me my hobbies. I don't know if you do this too, but like when people ask me like, what do you like to do for fun? And I'm like, I like to make more companies. I don't know.
Yeah, honestly, I'm like, what do you? Mine's golf. Like, so golf is the only thing I have. You know what I mean? I golf, maybe watch sports a little bit, but like beyond that, it's just like I'm either with the family or I'm working and doing AI stuff. But no, I totally agree. But like a lot of people don't have that like energy or passion about work. They may enjoy some parts of their work, but like it doesn't like give them energy, like you're saying. Like it's not a passion that they really care about. Right? And like back when I used to make music, it was like, and people are like, oh, why'd you stop making music? I was like, not a lucrative thing to do, but also you have to be in like this like mental headspace, at least I did, to where you felt like you had like creative juice or energy, or there was some spark or inspiration, or you had to have the time to do it and whatever. And there's kind of a loose parallel here, but like when someone's doing something that they are passionate about and gives them energy, like they're going, like that curiosity gene is going to get turned on, right? Like the persistence, let me figure this out, I'm going to keep pushing. So I think honestly, that's a really good point of like, don't force them to try to learn by doing something that they like, hey, you can use AI to help do this thing you don't enjoy doing more or faster. That's not going to get anybody excited. You know what I'm saying? And even if it would be exciting if they did it, it's going to be that effort and curiosity wall they're just going to keep bouncing up against because they don't really want to be doing it in the first place. I think that's honestly a huge unlock. Just like giving them the creative freedom, being like, you can work on work stuff. You can plan your 6-year-old's birthday party. Doesn't matter. We're just going to use AI to do it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I will say another thing that you're asking to address part of what you're asking to is for an organization, it really matters like who is buying into it. And we're lucky because he wants to try new stuff all the time. Like as CTO, I'm constantly having to like clean up shit that he just created with a new tool. So he's like that type of person. But like for us, our inflection point happened when Chris was like, I think we should be making more time and space to do this after I just experienced this. And he wasn't thinking that the week before. But when he said that gave me the confidence to be like, all right, we're going to do 2 weeks of just like building this process.
Home from daycare. But no, I'm with you though. I'm curious what you think about this. But I'm thinking about incentives, right? What motivates people? Everybody's coin operated. There's carrot, there's stick, whatever. And like, I'm almost thinking, would it be almost like more effective to just like have it be like, hey, everybody's got Claude Teams or whatever, right? You've got your thing. And we are going to bonus out token use because some companies people are using it so much. They're like, we have to manage our token use. We have to manage that. If you're on the flip side of it and you're like, we need people to burn tokens, right? Having, here's your token benchmark. And if you use this much, you get this bonus. And if you use this much, I feel like it would like almost force people to just use it because it's like, am I going to pass up like $250 extra a month because I won't use this awesome tool to like help me do my job better? I don't know. I've thought about like on that reverse side, just like incentivizing token use, like at an org level, like seeing what happened.
Yeah. I think it would lead to, my assumption or hypothesis is that it would lead to short-term maximization of that. I don't know if it would lead to like people building out like a longer term habit of like doing it. But
you'd have to put like some guardrail. It's people just be like, I'm just going to start new sessions, upload 15 PDFs that are all 30 pages and just be like, do X, do Y. There would have to be some like, okay. And like, once you get the bonus, like if you hit the bonus level, we're going to look at what you did that month before we bonus. You know what I'm saying? It can't be.
What was effective for us was when I started pulling up our Claude organization analytics and saying, here's who used the most each week. We had a few folks who were foreign to AI who we started. One guy on our team who was on the support team, he didn't ask for permission from anyone. And he was like, hey, I decided to start writing a book on recovery and I'm using like Claude to help me do it. And he'd like never really used AI before. I mean, he'd used it just to some degree, but it was like, he was only using it because he needed to for work. And then it went to like, he was doing this thing where spending his extra time writing a book. And I think that came from us putting up that dashboard and being like, hey, dude, you're not using anything.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, shit, how am I going to do this? And then he was like, all right, I'll just write a book.
Yeah, dude, that's hilarious. Yeah, shame is a powerful motivator. Carrot, stick, coin. These are all the things. But dude, this was so much fun.
Good luck editing it.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, this was like a long one, but I knew it was going to be. I purposely didn't schedule anything on the backside of this because I was like, I want this to go as long as it needs to. But this was fun, and I hope everybody in the audience got a lot out of this. I think Jordan, like, really, like, after that, after we had that like agents everywhere thing and like seeing some of the stuff that you do, I feel like a lot of the times, like, I'm at the bleeding edge with a lot of this stuff, and I feel like you're like a step or two ahead of me in terms of some of the stuff that you're doing, personal and all that stuff. I appreciate you coming on and unpacking it and weeding through everything with me. Just to close us out here, this is the floor is yours time. You can plug anything, give anybody a shout out, inspirational message, whatever you want. We'll put how to find you, connect with you, Sober Sidekick, all that stuff. We'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, floor is yours to close us out here.
Yeah. So I'll just pull back up this last little slide here. So definitely check out Sober Sidekick. It's totally free, like I mentioned earlier. It's anonymous as well. So if you're not in recovery, you can still join and just check it out. Maybe you'll be inspired to support somebody. And then also my TED Talk, I would love it for anyone to go check that out. It's capturing a lot of my thesis on where I believe technology is going to go with empowering people. This presentation was actually like all the thinking behind it happened way after my TED Talk. I wasn't even doing this agent stuff when I gave the talk, and it's interesting. Go back and look at it. So I would appreciate that. If you want to check out the personal OS, so I call mine Helm, but I made an abstracted version of it that takes all the general frameworks that I use and I put it in a open source project. So you can go check that out here, and I'll send the actual link to Spencer so that he can list it in the show notes. And then would love to stay in touch with folks on Twitter or X. I'm trying to do more community building there. And if anyone's there, I'd love to chat with you. Also on LinkedIn, I don't check it as much or as diligently. Spencer, thank you, man. You said you feel like I'm one step ahead. I don't think that's true. I think it's just we're learning different things. And I think there's things that we're learning at the same time. But then during that event, you showed me stuff around what you're doing with your clients that I was like, holy shit, you're so much deeper and more sophisticated on that front. So this was really fun. And I hope everyone out there listening got some benefit from it.
Dude, I know they did. I appreciate you saying that too. Like, we got to do the Agents Everywhere meetup again. That was like so much fun. For everybody that stuck around, thank you for listening to the whole thing. Jordan's a special guest. And dude, let's get dinner sometime. Let's hang out.
Let's do it.
But yeah, let's go follow him. Check out the GitHub repo. Follow him on LinkedIn. Follow him on Twitter. Engage with him. And check out Sober Sidekick as well. Jordan, thanks again for your time today, man. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, Spencer.
Thank you.